Hola amigos, and welcome back to another episode of La Vida Verde podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Human, here at Finca Vida Verde, and my guest this week is Nicole Reese. Nicole is a social anthropologist. She is a community builder, the founder of Terrenity, which is a data-driven research initiative to understand ecovillages. She is currently working for Ecovilla project down at Ecovilla San Mateo, and she's getting ready to transition to her new job at the Blue Dot project, where she's been funded for a research project. It's going to be a great a great episode all about ecovillages. So we hope you enjoy. Stick around. We hope you enjoy. Nicole Reese.
The one and only human.
Welcome to La Vida Verde podcast. I love that you're here. Okay, first of all, I just want to say I know this is like when you first messaged me, I think I've told you this already. One of my first like good friends, my neighbor, the first girl I ever had a crush on, her name was Nicole Reese.
Mm-hmm.
So when you messaged me, I was like, Nicole Reese just reaching out to me. But then I saw this Nicole Reese is really into ecovillages, and and then I found you were a different Nicole Reese.
Right. And you happen to be living in one.
I happen to be living in an ecovillage, but you knew that.
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you grow up? Yo, everybody, what's happening? This is Humano. Guys, thank you, everybody who's been watching this podcast. I want to invite you to join our Patreon, patreon.com/La Vida Verde podcast. We are looking for ways to build our community. We have a lot of great content on there, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. It helps fund this program so we can keep having great guests, great conversations. Go check it out, patreon.com/La Vida Verde podcast. Pura vida.
Well, I was born in San Jose del Cabo in Mexico, but I grew up in Park City, Utah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the mountains.
Why were you born in Mexico? Just your parents were visiting there and they're like, oops, got pregnant. Now we got to have a baby.
No, my dad was working there. Yeah.
What is your dad? What was he doing?
He was in resort and timeshare development. So living a vacation life down there, really.
Nice. And that's why you transitioned to Park City, I imagine, because there's a bunch of resorts there.
Yes, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was it like growing up in Park City, Utah?
Well, it's a lot more nature than when I moved to California later on in my life. It was definitely like you could walk out your back door and find a trail. And there were the Four Seasons, and that was some of the most beautiful parts of living. I always joke that the nature is awesome, but the people are kind of
In Park City?
Yeah.
Why? Because the religious stuff?
A little bit, yeah.
Or the money? Which one?
Both.
Both. All of it. Park City's nice. I've been there one time. I was there for the Sundance Film Festival. Did you ever go hang out at Sundance?
Oh, yeah. It was like the best time of year because we would get out of school early and like... And then there would just be a bunch of people walking around in fur. For
those of you who don't know, Park City has this kind of like little downtown. It's like kind of a quaint little downtown vibe. It's pretty big. It's not small, but it's like, I don't know, like maybe 15, 20 blocks or something like that. And during Sundance, the whole thing is just full of like parties. I mean, literally, I just got drunk for like 3 days. I didn't even mean to. It's just like everywhere you go, there's like studios and film organizations, and they're just throwing parties with free alcohol everywhere. And it's also like, I didn't go to the actual. There's also screenings of films and stuff, but I didn't go to any of those. I just went to the like amazing parties. I was doing like the handshaking and like the networking. Mm-hmm. It's a fun time. Park City's cool. Anyway,
yeah.
So but you left Park City.
Right, yeah. I transitioned to live in California.
Where?
And was working. I spent a lot of time in Southern California in Long Beach.
Okay.
And I was working in an urban wildlife park. So it was like 44 acres of native plant habitat restoration.
Okay.
It's like in the middle of the city where there would be like coyotes and eagles and rabbits, and people would dump their pets. Like if they had like turtles or guinea pigs that they didn't want, they're just like, oh, just release it back to the wild. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time, bringing back native plant species in California.
You were like regenerating
essentially like getting rid
Okay.
of invasive species and then planting and cultivating.
Have you always been into like that kind of thing? Like plants have always been part of your life, or was that something you kind of did as a job and then you discovered it?
No, it was definitely it started I discovered it, I feel, more so as soon as I moved out. I moved out at 18 to go live in California, and, it was like being able to experience all the things that I truly wanted in life. That's when I really got into spirituality. I became vegan, and I was like
Mhm.
and environmentalism because, at that time, I was growing more aware of the global state of everything, and it just informed my desire to have all my activities
Mhm.
geared towards, activities that support the health of the planet.
Thank you. And you're thank you for doing that because this is important. Yeah. And you're also you're one of the younger people in our community actually. Like you're like in your 20s, right?
Right, I
Yeah, yeah.
just turned 29.
Okay, 29. So you're almost in your 30s.
Mhm,
But still, this is a older community. I mean, most of the
mhm.
people I know are like in their 40s minimum and then 40s to 60s. So, but I love that you like you caught that bug early and like you're like this is what I want to do and you went to school, you studied and where'd you go to college? Or did you?
Well, yeah, no, so I was accepted to Berkeley University, but I didn't go because I had a job at the time. 'Cause
UC
that's
Berkeley?
yeah.
Okay.
So I was just that was sort of also in my anti-institutional phase where I was like, "Why would I waste? Why would I lock myself up in an institution for 4 years? Like, I already am making an impact." I was like the director of an arts nonprofit at the time that was combining like arts with activism. So it just seemed like kind of a real world versus theoretical world
Uh-huh.
opportunity, and I chose the real world.
Okay.
And but what I did eventually study, I like strategized it so that I got paid to go to community college.
Mhm.
So rather than going into debt, I was like paid to go to school
Cool.
and then use my studies to obtain a degree in anthropology, which is
Okay.
a huge fascination of mine. Like I was telling you earlier, the only way we can like predict and shape the future of humanity is by understanding our nature and how we got even into the
Totally.
crises that we currently face. And so,
Agreed.
yeah,
What kind of anthropology?
it was cultural anthropology.
Cultural.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So this is what I use in my studies now around ecovillages, which I did catch the bug, as you say, about 6 years ago. I saw like an ad for a gap year program at an ecovillage in Panama, and I was
Okay.
like,
Which one?
Kaluyala.
Oh, yeah. I know a
Yeah.
lot about Kaluyala.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that was the first time I'd heard that word and sort of the first time I was just like, it was one of those standout moments, like, I need to know more about those. And
Is Kaluyala an eco-village? I think of it more as a retreat center or something because they don't own it's, like, owned by one family, right?
no, so I think of it as an eco village, and they call themselves one because they're also like developing houses for people to live. For me, this is a great opportunity to define what an eco village is,
Yeah,
right?
let's do that because, I mean, yeah, like I said, like, they're no and no disrespect to them, I think what they're anybody who's working towards creating housing and good thing but, like, one of the things for me that defines it is, like, people kind of collectively owning things, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, so eco villages can be like quite broad, and there's even like urban eco villages. So for me, it's a collective that's leveraging like shared resources to live a more sustainable life. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean ownership. Like people can be renting inside of a community, but what does distinguish it is like permanent residence. And that you can't
Mm,
only have, for me, there are eco villages that are only technically active like 6 months out of the year. And I don't really see that as a viable solution
mhm.
towards allowing people to live a regenerative lifestyle because by nature it will push them to travel at a dedicated time of the year and to travel and consume resources and to move around versus like my ultimate goal in supporting eco villages is so that we can like re-indigenize ourselves in order to actually ground into place and find meaning and then start to communicate with the natural world around us again. And that's not as possible, I feel, when you're constantly moving around and there's no sense of ownership because you often mistreat what you don't own.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as I was a musician, was touring for a lot of years and staying at eco villages. It was cool because I got to visit a lot of eco villages in that time. I mean, we were specifically performing in those kinds of environments because
It's
I
dope.
wanted to get to know them, which was a cool experience. But at the same time, yes, I was not living I mean, I was not living. I was singing about these things, but I wasn't living it. And so, like, if you settling down and living in a place year round really makes a huge difference. Like it really does. Like even like there's times I'm like, oh, it's cloudy and rainy now. I kind of want to get out of here. Like yeah, but maybe for a couple weeks but like I think like that chasing the sun. I don't know if it's a fully sustainable reality. It's like because then you leave your place for a while and like what happens? It's like and then you're not experiencing the full experience of living in a place. We're so used to moving around. So you're saying like year-round living is what makes it an eco village? That's what I heard.
It's what I feel contributes to being a better version of an eco village, but
Okay.
it's not a defining
Okay.
characteristic.
Well, keep going. What are the defining characteristics of an eco
Right. So the
village?
difference between it must be like more than just, for example, 2 or 3 families. It has to be like scale wise. It can't just be like a small pocket. For it to be a true village setting, you have to have a certain number of relationships. And that's like at least 3+ families in order to create those bonds. Um, Permanent residence, as I implied,
Okay.
sustainable practices,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want to throw in around like the intentionality of it, shared values.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically it's so interesting, I feel, because right now we're in this sort of what we call the eco-village movement or regenerative village movement or just intentional communities movement, whatever you want to call it. And that spans the the schema of everything from people wanting their own homestead to people building a sustainable community or neighborhood pocket with others to people realizing that sustainable communities are a product that you can sell and that they're creating large scale projects around it to people who have found legal and digital loopholes to create parallel institutions and become autonomous from the government. So it's kind of there's this whole communities movement and they're being expressed in different ways. I'm just interested in eco villages particularly because communities I find are like a vehicle for experimentation. So like all the large scale transformation we want to see in the society, I feel is only possible in these like pockets of sanity, we call them, as Meg Wheatley calls them, but like these pockets of experimentation where we can try out like alternative economics, self-sufficiency on a
Mm-hmm.
radical scale, and leveraging collective resources, which can only be done like if I trust you and you trust me, and we're actually a community.
Wow. This is I mean, yeah, this it's funny because in this community, like we've been living this reality and we're figuring these things out, but you're like from a data driven space, like you're actually like no, this is what you need to do. Like this is what needs to happen. I don't think a lot of these kinds of projects come with that information of like if we don't have this, it won't really work. But so how did you like start? Yeah, like how did you come to all this knowledge?
Well,
Like
so you touched on something interesting in that there's like not really a standard framework. So a lot of people are like kind of making it up as they
as they go
go.
along,
Like
yeah.
we kind of have to because there are some previous success cases of like mature communities who have been around for 30 years that came sort of more in a
Sure.
modern context of building what it means to build a village. And we can look at indigenous communities as well and use them as a model, but really we don't know. And this is sort of it came out of like a thirst to be like, well, I, as I started observing communities and kind of charting the whole movement, I realized I was like, oh, like no one really people keep having the same questions. People keep having the same questions over and over like, how do you resolve for conflict? How do you fund it? What legal entity? And so I just wanted to like smash all of this information together in like an organized way because my brain just wants to codify things in that
Mhm.
way.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's really helpful. I hope that you continue with that work because and that's I guess what brought you here. What brought you to the Machuca Valley?
Well, so I came to work for the Ecovilla project. Having documented a lot of communities all over the world, I was really interested in specifically how unique that model is. And I just don't see regenerative community development projects at the stage that they're at. Um, with like a test case of like the 12 years of it having worked, and then also the expansion phase of like, okay, we're going to spread this around the world. That fits with my mission of like wanting to see more sustainable communities all over the world. But as you know, I'm not going to stay with them.
Yeah, well, just not something, you got something better going on.
Well, yeah, so I'm gonna miss you guys. I'm gonna miss the Machuca Valley, but I am actually, I think, more drawn. I've been traveling a lot in Latin countries and in Europe, to different communities, and what I realize I long for, and I think is more culturally appropriate for me, is to try and instill change in like, the country that I feel like culturally relevant to,
Which is?
the U.S.
Okay.
So I did get offered a position. I made a research proposal to the Blue Dot Project,
Mhm.
and they're funding my research to investigate all of the communities that there are.
Congratulations. That's very exciting.
Yeah, and then document what makes them successful or not. So
What is the Blue Dot Project?
so the Blue Dot Project is an investment fund led by different investors and people experience in bioregional mapping and so on, wanting to divert capital to the development of regenerative communities, which is like,
Hello, that's
we need
awesome.
that.
Please.
And it correlates to what I said about people realizing that there's value, not just economic value, but like just impact value in investing in regenerative communities. And so to do that first, it's such an interesting way, but they're going very slowly and wanting to understand the landscape first, which is understanding, well, what influences the success of a regenerative community? What are the variables that if you like modulate this or modulate that, it can determine whether a project succeeds or fails. So I'm super stoked for that, and I'm gonna go live in a bit smaller but further along community
Where?
in California. It's in Dulzura outside of San Diego.
Okay.
I met the owner when I was traveling with this startup for regenerative neighborhoods I was working with, called Regen Tribe.
Mhm.
I met the owner in Berlin last summer, and I don't know, it just all conspired that it's like close to family, it's like more culturally specific. I feel like I'm not a gentrifying force in another country. I just feel like I can be in a space that I'll have more leverage for impact.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. It's a conversation that keeps coming up. Do you feel like what's happening here is like massive, is like negatively impacting the the community? I mean, with the understanding that you've lived here for what, less than a year, right?
Oh yeah, less than 5 months.
Right. So it's still kind of new, but like in general, like you see this as a gentrification issue or
So I do see a pattern of land acquisition by wealthier foreigners in more impoverished countries, which does imply like an economic disadvantage
Mhm.
already. But and here we were speaking with locals and charting that, yeah, like prices have become already a little bit disparate, and there hasn't been that much develop in the area.
Prices for what?
Like
Land?
for land, for
Oh.
leases, for rent. I think goods are already expensive, but even the cost of goods in this area compared to others is interesting. And so I don't think it's hard to chart that, when you weigh, for example, like the positive impact of planting trees and, regenerating cattle land, which, for example, at the Ecovilla projects have done, versus like inherent um, cultural inequalities or economic inequalities. I still don't know how to reconcile that. I just feel like I personally would be able to make more of an impact
Yeah.
in my own
No,
country.
it's fair. It's fair. I mean, it's a serious thing that like we're all trying to figure out. I mean, my general like kind of perspective on that is like I don't know that it's avoidable. It's like to me it's capitalism in general that is
Hmm.
the culprit. Like it's it's designed into like the model that people that it will continue to happen. And until it's addressed on a very systemic level, it's not like, I mean, you can't blame I don't blame these people that's come here looking for a better life when, and they can afford it. And there's also varying levels of income inequality. It's like not everybody who comes here is actually wealthy. Not everybody, who lives here is necessarily poor. So it's like it I see the gentrification thing. We talk about it a lot on the
I'm
podcast,
sure.
and it's like it's interesting. It's just I can see it, and I can see the potential for it. Um, and you know, it's not always. It's not simple. It's not a one-sided thing. But anyways, I'm happy you're going to be working in a place that you're feeling you can do more impact. I'm excited to talk to you more about like so.
Yeah, come visit me in
I
California.
will. I will. In my I'll come gentrify California for you. No, I'm just kidding.
Already.
I know. Um so yeah, like what was it just that got you like specifically like into the eco village thing? What was it? Like was there a moment where you're like this is what I want to do?
The weird thing is it was such a cumulative process. I can't chart the moment where I was obsessed
But
because it was just a growing obsession.
did you go into college? You said you studied anthropology. Was that because you were like, this is the path forward? Or was it like through going there, you were like, oh, that's the path forward?
Yeah, it was a fascination on just humans and how we could do better. And
Mm,
so there wasn't a moment. It was just like a collection of finding out more and going a little bit deeper into the rabbit hole and then understanding all of the different aspects of the meta crises and then also just a growing love for the environment and then also like a protective emotion for and understanding the way that we consume resources and all of it. It was just like, oh, I want to do better. Oh, I like the impact I can have versus the impact we can have is much greater. And the way
mhm,
I need to build stronger we's, and the we's that I need to cultivate are people who have shared values.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it was definitely a
mm.
process. But about 3 years, I committed to this as like a profession. It was quite odd. I was just like, okay, I'm leaving California. I'm leaving my job. I'm going to found Terrenity, and then I'm going to travel to different communities and see what life is like. 'Cause
Terrenity is your personal business that you're operating out of to work on these kinds of projects.
yes, Terrenity is a research syndicate that coordinates research and data-driven approach to understanding best practices on how to build eco-villages, both for people who are building ones and seeking ones, and just trying to like mesh that together.
Do you have a success story that you're like, these guys did it right? And like, is there, or even a couple like that you're like, these are really successful projects that are like a good example to look at? Like,
Well, so it depends on how you want to kind of like cleave it, right? Because you can look at communities that were started 30 years ago,
mhm,
um, 30, 40 years ago. There are the really well-known OG ones like The Farm in the USA, Oroville in India, Tamara in Portugal, Findhorn in Scotland, and so on, and Damanhur in Italy. Like those are the main ones that
mhm,
have been around for a while and initially started more so as like alternative spiritual communities, but
mhm.
organized around clearly sustainable practices. When it comes to modern villages, we're still looking for that poster child of success because
Mhm.
we really haven't. Every single community that we've gone to, and I talk with people who are really alive in the space, there's always like, yes, but no. Like, yes, they've got this point right, but they're maybe missing this. Um, with Terrenity, I do run a publication on and write articles weekly
Okay.
on regenerative village building.
Where can people find that? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's on Substack. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Substack. It's the new thing,
I
man.
I love it.
Okay.
It motivates me to write, and so part of this is like having committed to this 3 years ago, it's just sort of evolved into I want creating literature and creating resources to support mostly village builders to pursue that.
Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been to, so I've you mentioned the farm. That's the only of those that you mentioned, the farm is the only one I've been to. I'm very
Mhm.
familiar with it. I have a number of friends who grew up there, and who live there. My buddy Biko, he grew up and lives there, still, and he, you know, they had a situation where yes, they started as a spiritual community. They were a bunch of hippies that moved from San Francisco. They basically didn't really have a plan. They just like found the cheap land and they ended up in this like, very conservative enclave of Tennessee. Um, and they made it work. But at some point they did have like you know, they were a commune. I mean, a lot of these places, I guess, were communes in the sense of like trying various different economic models, basically built around socialist, very highly communal socialist communist values of, I don't know about how the farm worked, but I know many of those projects in like Northern California at the time, they were like sharing everything. Everything you worked for went to the community. If you wanted something of your own financially, you had to like petition the community for it. It was not your money. Um, but basically in general, everything was more communally owned. And at some point, the farm had a big like reckoning where they're like, we don't want to do that anymore. Now we want to be more like a neighborhood, which I guess for me, it's kind of one of my models that I use to define the modern eco-village,
Mhm.
because it is more of a neighborhood. And they also started a number of businesses. They have business incubators. So they have like a yeah, like, it's kind of embracing capitalism in a way. Like, look, we're not going to we can't beat capitalism, so we have to kind of integrate it into our systems, and also that kind of that need of some individualism that exists in Western culture that doesn't exist so much in indigenous culture as much, but like this very, individualist reality of each person having their own home and each person having their own things and they're allowed to own and be private. Like that kind of shifted in the farm. And I see that's kind of like the modern, is that what you say that's kind of a general model for the modern eco-village? Because that's what's happening here. I mean, it's more of a neighborhood with shared values and certain things in common.
Mhm. I think the neighborhood model is more friendly to a lot of people coming from first world countries, and more individualistic cultures. I think things like, and not all communities are communes, of course. Communes are defined by like collective ownership over individual ownership. But there's also really interesting economic models like shared income, where in that case, even like mothers, for example, are also rewarded for their like usually unpaid work. So things like that to me are really interesting because they're like innovative in the sense that they're not following traditional extractive capitalistic individual
Mhm.
just solely. But yes, like living in just like a more intentional neighborhood is more the model that is friendly to people. And so you have different modern projects. Because the reason I mentioned the publication is I made a list of like my top 11 favorite regenerative villages. And there are ones like all over the world happening. There's Regenerative Villages, which is headed by a professor from Stanford. There's Traditional Dream Factory in Portugal. There's Monsterstrasse in Germany, which is a really interesting example of an urban and this is where also neighborhood is really interesting because they have this entire cul-de-sac that they basically own.
Mm.
And so it's fascinating to watch people like take over factories and renovate industrial areas and then have
Mhm.
this like cultural regeneration happening in like places where normally there were like industrial old world activities happening.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the urban eco-village versus we're more of a like farm, country based out here. Um, yeah, it's come up a lot. Also, like this, just I love that you started by defining what eco-village is, because they're totally different than us, but we do have this kind of shared ideals
Mhm.
of why we're doing it. I
Mhm.
think that's maybe more the bigger is like the intention.
Mhm.
I think that for me, like that's what I kind of come to, because for years people would come and they'd be like, it's to me like it's funny because La Ecovilla, I always thought it was just like kind of creative marketing. It means the Eco-Village, obviously. I'm
Yeah,
like, well,
yeah.
it's not really an Eco-Village, but it is an Eco-Village, actually. It is very much an Eco-Village. They're intentional and very ecologically driven in certain ways. But it's different than Taco Tal, for instance, where I kind of had this idea, well, like, we were more of the commune kind of reality where we collectively own everything. We make decisions collectively. There's wisdom in both models. And
Mhm.
actually, we're moving more towards the neighborhood model where now we're like, you know what? 16 years
Yeah.
in, we don't necessarily want to make all the decisions together. And like, I just want to be able to, it comes down to, again, in capitalism, it's like equity. Like, I've put more in than my neighbor did, for instance, into this
Mhm.
project. So why should he get an equal share of the project when he's put almost nothing into this project? Or, I mean, in terms of like structure and infrastructure,
Mhm.
when I've built this, all this, I mean, technically this is still owned by our community. And I
Mhm.
don't own the equity that I've put into this community. So for that reason, we've started moving towards that model of like private ownership within a collective sphere. So like we'll
Mhm.
own the land together, but within that with the communal lands together, but within that we own our private lots. So I think it's really interesting to me, this like kind of the how it's structured. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's a really popular sort of tug of war in these community spaces because it's like, like on this side of the spectrum of shared or this side of the spectrum of individual, and it like you land where it works for you. But certainly, it's what I think is more interesting is to like um, give equity, but have it correspond to input. Like not necessarily like you can have private ownership, of course, and you can allow people who have been there longer and contributed longer to have more sway, but still have a very like participatory process.
Mm.
And that there's if there's no benefit to owning collectively, and there's more benefit to owning individually, then you own individually,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All
but
right.
you operate collectively.
Yeah. Okay. It's okay. I'm still it's fascinating to me. Like I love that you're like coming at it from like, I wish you weren't leaving so soon because I feel like we've just starting to get to know each other, and this is such a passion of mine too. I would love to pick your brain on it some more so we can keep in touch about it.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, swear. Okay. Nicole Reese. Nicole Reese, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you
Is
for
there
having
anything
a
else?
podcast.
Where can people? So you mentioned your company is
Terrenity.
Terrenity, and
Mhm.
how can people find your business or you?
Well, the website is terrenity.org.
Terrenity.
Terrenity. Just the combination of Terra and Serenity, like the harmony on earth that I feel like we can achieve if we create these communities and then link them together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrenity.org. And do you have your Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, Terrenity.ecovillages and then
Oh,
Terrenity.
Terrenity.ecovillages.
Yeah, and then for the Instagram, and then
Okay.
Terrenity.substack.com for the publication.
Substack. I don't know Substack, but I'm now motivated to look at it just so I can read some of your writings. Nicole Reese, thank you for being here on La Vida Verde podcast. I am your host, Matthew Human. We release episodes every Tuesday. I want to say thank you to Eco Teas Yerba Mate. Thank you, Eco Teas, for keeping me charged. Please go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/La Vida Verde podcast. We are looking for ways to support this podcast to keep it going. If you are interested in sponsoring, reach out to us. We are open for business. You can find us every Tuesday on YouTube. We release at noon. We also have on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next Tuesday with another episode. Thank you so much. Pura
Woo!
vida.